Okay, so we're recording. So I'm Meredith Hawley. I am a lawyer and certified life coach, and I help employees stop sexual harassment without quitting their jobs. And I am joined by Michael Fuller, the Underdog Lawyer. Introduce yourself,
Hey,
Mike.
Meredith. Yeah, Mike Fuller, Underdog Lawyer. We help consumers take on large corporations, and a good amount of our practice right now is advising employees how to handle safety and ethical issues they're experiencing in the workplace during this shutdown.
Yeah. So we both are seeing this. I've been talking to so many people lately who have one reason or another that they don't want to report something dangerous that they're seeing. And I hear people say, well, I'm from the South. I'm from England. I'm from Australia. We don't report things. We don't talk about dangerous situations. It's very scary. It's against our culture. And I always say, like, it's against everybody's like, it's not an intuitive thing that anyone goes to work wanting to do. Do you see people have a hard time reporting
You
things?
do, especially the nurses and the medical
Yeah.
providers. These are not complainers by their very nature. A lot of them are more conservative, and they're opposed to lawsuits, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah.
Um, but even if you're just, looking at it from a straight capitalism perspective, it's not fair for one business to cut corners and save money on safety issues when another business that they're competing against is doing the right thing and incurring those costs. And so even I tell the conservatives, just get the truth out there. And, regulations are there for a reason. You don't necessarily have to file a lawsuit just because you're going to be documenting a safety issue. And
Right.
after all, it is a safety issue. And so it's more important than litigation or, even your job. If you're there and it's unsafe, or in a lot of the cases, some of the nurses that we're advising, their patients' lives are at risk because of some of these cost saving measures these corporations are engaging in. The right thing to do is to document it and report it.
I mean, and I see, like, I've had a few cases with against Life Care Centers of America, which is the end of life institution that where the first outbreaks in America happened, where multiple people died because they had negligent care. And so my clients have been employees who were reporting seeing these safety violations before there was any kind of concern about coronavirus, but just seeing these institutional problems happen. And I think that, like, we can minimize at the time the importance of the safety violation because we don't see the person who's going to get hurt later and their families later. But these have real impact on people's lives. So, like, not just, like, I agree with what you're saying on the consumer side, on the, like, capitalism side. Like, it's not fair for life care centers to be sacrificing patient lives while they cut corners to not have sufficient staffing levels. And then another end of life facility isn't doing the same. They're actually taking care of their people. But then at the same time, it's also so dangerous, I think.
No, absolutely. And, Oregon is aider and abettor liability state. And so if you're in a management role at one of these facilities, we represent an activities director at an old folks home. And she sounded the alarm. She said, I don't think we're up to code. I think we're in violation of the federal and state rules. And she was terminated a few days later. And, it's not only good that she blew the whistle so that she can vindicate her rights, but if she didn't, and then one of her employees ended up getting sick or had an employment issue, she could
Or one
be
of the patients,
right,
even.
or one of the patients. They could
Yeah.
see their names as a defendant on a complaint a year from now or 6 or 7 years from now. So that's just another reason why it's important to document the truth of what's going on and to get that information to people who can help.
I have a similar case. I have a case against a pet food store where my client was a essential worker and she was a manager, and she was advocating for all these safety measures that have become pretty normal in the essential services industries, like the plexiglass screens and masks and things like that. And she even bought masks for her employees herself because she was so worried about not only her employees, but also the customers coming in. And then she got fired for a pretty obviously, like, pretextual reason. But to me, the interesting thing is I think that this is why a lot of people don't report, is they're afraid of getting fired. What do you tell people about that?
That's a tough one because I just tell them this. I saw he was a family man. He worked at a big bank. He had 5 kids. and he could feel the retaliation. He saw what he knew was wrong. And I told him, you're right, it takes courage and it's not fun. The problem with that is he decided he wasn't going to report, and then he was ultimately terminated. When he came back to me, I said, you know, maybe find a better employment lawyer than me, but you have no evidence that you ever documented any of these concerns, and
I mean,
you have very little rights in that scenario. So it does take courage, but it's the right thing to do for various reasons, including in case you ever get wrongfully terminated or retaliated against.
yeah, then you have at least a claim. The thing that I see people do sometimes is they are afraid to report and they're afraid of getting fired. And so they quit. And I always think, why not just let them fire you? And people have, I think, a false assumption that there's like a permanent record somewhere of what has happened to you as an employee that future employers are going to see, and there's going to be a black mark, and it doesn't exist. Like,
Yeah, and I will often associate in more experienced employment lawyers in those kind of pickle situations where there's pros and cons to
yeah,
quitting or letting them terminate you.
yeah,
Uh, my advice is always just, you just got to document the unsafe. It's the right thing to do. You'll look back and you won't regret complaining and documenting about unsafe, illegal conditions in the workplace. And, I guess you don't have to start with a formal complaint to the government or even a formal complaint to
yeah,
HR. The problem is if you approach your employer reasonably and just verbally say, hey, what we're doing over here, I don't think that it complies with the law. Doing it informally encourages retaliation because they know that there is no record. And so it's a big step, but we do it in law firms. If we notice that somebody's doing something that's against the law or questionable, we look into it, we do it, document it in writing, and
yeah.
I would advise my clients of nothing less.
And it's hard and it's scary, but ultimately, I've even seen employees be more protected because the employer is a little bit afraid of them and less likely to get fired because they know that they're enforcing those legal protections that we have as employees. Have you ever seen something like that?
Yeah, and as attorneys, we can kind of advise our clients of special words or languages.
Yeah.
Because if you're, most big corporations, they have HR, and that involves general counsel reviewing terminations. And when you see something saying, just to let you know, I'm reporting something that I believe violates state or federal law. Specifically on this date, I saw this happen and I think it's unsafe, and please let me know what you can do to address it. That's not the person that you fire usually.
Yeah.
Maybe you make them a severance offer at worst. Hopefully you just address the issue and apologize and move on.
Yeah.
So there is information we can give, the public so that they're not as vulnerable to a retaliation.
And then this is different state by state, but a lot of people I see are afraid to report what they believe is something illegal because they say, well, I'm not an attorney. I don't know if it's illegal. I don't know how to research that. I don't know how to figure it out. And the protections in Oregon say that if you have a good faith belief that it's illegal, still report. You still have protections. So you don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to be an expert in the field, but just be specific that you believe that it's illegal. I think that's super
Yeah,
cool.
that's great advice. And, that's because there's a public policy because we want people raising safety issues in the workplace, even if it's not technically illegal. That's not necessarily their job to determine that. And you're right. It really isn't relevant if you have to go to court, whether it was illegal or not. If you
Yeah.
believed in good faith that it was. And honestly, the only people coming to me with these issues really do feel in good faith. I mean, I haven't
Yeah.
really had anybody where I felt like they were just going out of their way to needlessly file a grievance. I mean, it's a tough thing to have to do. And so in my experience, the people who complain do believe that it's against a rule or a law.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm able to shed light on that for them. And other times I just let them know, only OSHA is going to find out if this really was, against the law,
Right.
or only the, regulatory body, but all you can do is just state your good faith belief that it is, or maybe, and report it and document
Right.
that in a way that it's there in the future if you need it.
Right. So I always tell people at first, I think a lot of people want to go to their employer and have a conversation about it, which I think is totally fair and not like ambush their employer with a formal letter, which sounds scary, right? But I always think it is really important, whether you do it by text or whether you do it by email, to just follow up and confirm the conversation that you had. Do you kind of, and that's to create evidence, but it's also to formalize and make sure you're on the same page about what you talked about.
I think so. And honestly, I understand workplace loyalty. I've always felt like it was a privilege to have a job and you fight to keep your job. So I understand the hesitation, but in my experience, the employees that come to me and say, hey, I'm noticing this, employers that risk people's safety and cut corners and, break the law, you don't need to show loyalty to those people when it comes to reporting
Yeah.
something. It is uncomfortable to do. And understand more in the small business context because it's tough, small business. You can't afford a lawyer to just advise you on the legality of everything you're doing. I totally get that. And so it's a judgment call. It's a lot easier to make though when there's formal HR departments and it's a large corporation with legal counsel. We rarely will prosecute a small business that we think is working in good faith to address a safety issue.
I think you can't even bring a legal claim if the employer is making good faith efforts to address something. I mean, if they're willing to work with you, then you've addressed the issue and you've created safety, right? And if they're not willing to work with you, then you have protections under the law. The main thing that I think about the loyalty issue, because I think it is so crucial, I think that that's so smart that you brought that up. The main thing I think about that is your loyalty to the violation of law, or is your loyalty to the people who could potentially be injured by it? Because most of my clients who really go forward are doing it to protect other employees because that's where their loyalty is. They don't want somebody else to get hurt.
No, absolutely. So how do you advise people? Because what we do see sometimes is they'll file a complaint or they'll send an email to HR. I think this is illegal, and they don't get a reduction in pay necessarily. Their hours aren't necessarily changed, but there's just subtle hostility in the workplace, and it's kind of a hey, it's us and them, and I don't know why you would write us something like that, but now we do what we have to do.
Mm-hmm.
How do you advise people when they get that kind of that subtle retaliation
Yeah.
that may
So
not rise to a legal claim?
yeah, we in my office we do a cultural health training certification. All of my clients go through it to handle stuff like that because I think that that can have a real impact when you are in, like, we spend most of our days at work, right? If you don't feel healthy at work, then that's the majority of your life that you're feeling anxious and distressed. And so we have a whole program that we take people through. And basically what I teach is that they have a wrong thought. They have an incorrect thought. And their thought is something like, it's very important for us to do this illegal thing, right? And it's just wrong. And so it's like, I picture it like if you're teaching a kindergarten class and the whole kindergarten class believes we need to eat cookies every day for every meal, you're not going to be distressed when they're mad at you that you take away their cookie. You just know it's not actually how it works. It's not healthy. And if we can take that adult stance around people who are acting like children at work, it's not easy. And I think it takes support. And this is why we take people through a whole program about it. But you can be in that place where you are aligned with your integrity, not aligned with their thinking error. That's kind of
That
how,
makes sense.
yeah. But I mean, I think that you have to be prepared for it. I think a lot of people have both problems, like you can err on both sides. One is, I'm just going to report and they're going to be so glad that I reported this problem. And they're my friends and they're my family and they're going to love me and they're all going to respond supportive of me. And often people, they're wrong, they're incorrect, but they're mad. Like they still are mad, even if
Yeah.
it's incorrect. And then on the other side, I think that people have a thinking error that is like, my boss needs to like me in order for me to succeed in my job. And my experience is, this is my personal experience, but also with my clients, is if your boss is a little bit afraid of you, you actually have more leverage. And if they know you're going to be in integrity, you have more leverage to create what you want in the workplace.
That's a great point. As long, if you just do everything from a standpoint of integrity and you know what you stand for, it does make it a lot easier moving forward.
You like look back and you know why you did what you did. But if you did it so that your boss is going to like you, that's pretty unreliable anyway. I think.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So do you advise clients to report just internally to HR or to their direct supervisor, or do you advise them to report to the government as well when it's a safety issue?
Yeah, I mean, so safety issues I think are pretty important to report right away because there's a really quick window of when you've lost your claim. So OSHA wants to, if you report to OSHA, they want to respond right away, right? They want to know right away. I think if you see more regulatory violations, other violations, you potentially can wait a little bit longer. But I think if you actually see a safety issue, like if someone is in physical danger, you call the police. If there's a safety issue, you call OSHA to get it resolved, like to get that safety issue resolved. But I think what I do is I tell my clients to trust their instincts about what the next step is, what the best way to, because I'm not in the workplace. I don't know their boss like they know their boss. I don't know their HR like they know their HR. So we kind of work together to get them really clear about what their instinct is about the most effective way to create safety. What
We
do you?
occasionally see corporations, usually large ones, that they have a whole handbook on how to report these things. And if you don't do it just their way, which often doesn't involve notifying the government, they may try to fault you for it later. Have you seen that? And do you still
Yeah.
just encourage people
I've
to?
seen that, but I think that most of those that I've seen look like ways to get around solving safety issues, right? So if you're an employee who actually cares about the issue, and to me, safety issues also include discrimination, they include sexual harassment, all of these issues that we see at work. If you're someone who actually wants to solve the problem, I think it's important to know what those policies say, but then also come back to trusting your instincts about what is actually going to work to effectively resolve it. And you can't, it is retaliate. If you report to a government agency, that gives you so much more protection is the advice that I give. What do you say to people?
I agree. If the employer knows,
Yeah, then
uh,
you have to report outside. Yeah.
and I think it's kind of a case by case basis. If this is a type, if you're at a, working somewhere like at a bowling alley and you saw somebody once not put the mask on when they should have, and it's tight profit margins, family owned business, I'm going to be hard pressed to tell you to go call the government and get them involved. Whereas if it's more of a systematic health violation that's going to affect a lot more people at a larger corporation, I'm more inclined to say go ahead and report that
So,
to the
yeah.
government, because I know how devastating, and not everybody does everything perfect all the time, and it can just be devastating to a small business when the government starts investigating you. Whereas if you just report it internally, they fix it, life goes on. You might be saving your own job. Sadly, I have had a few cases where we've done so well in our employment claim, among other problems, usually employers that are having problems already, that we bankrupted them and they're not able to pay anything, no
Yeah.
matter how bad their
Which
conduct
is
was.
never the goal. I think the goal is always safety and always, I mean, I deal for the most part with sexual harassment issues. And one of the steps that I see my clients take a lot that is effective is to address the harassment or the discriminatory behavior directly, even with the harasser. A lot of people don't want to do that, and that you have to trust your instincts about that. It's not required. But sometimes if you can just say to somebody, hey, that was sexist, hey, that was racist, hey, this seems illegal, then they at least know. Because sometimes people are so invested in having a wrong idea about something that they don't know. Other times they know and they're intentionally doing it. And in that case, they're not the person you need to tell about it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. What were you
No,
gonna
I was thinking I'm going to refer you a case. I got conflicted out of my own case, but it's a restaurant down in Southern Oregon where
say?
this woman was just repeatedly sexually harassed, and she reported it to corporate, and then they retaliated against her. So it's very similar. It
Yeah.
wasn't a safety issue. I mean, or it was, but it was a sexual harassment issue. But
Yeah.
I'll send
Yeah.
it to you offline.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that comes back to the point that you're talking about of those subtle retaliations also. And I think if you are clear about why you think something is retaliation and it seems clear that it is retaliation, also document those things is the other step that I think is really important for people to take.
You ever advise employees to preemptively like record phone calls or things like that? I pretty much don't, but
Pretty
I
much
know
they
some
don't
people
do
do.
it. I think it cuts both. I mean, I've had recordings that I've been like, oh, I didn't believe you before, but now I believe
Yeah,
you.
I just settled a mid six-figure case, and the whole reason it settled was because of a recorded phone call that the other party didn't know was being recorded that totally vindicated our case. But I
Yeah.
still, my general advice is to not record phone calls because I think it just looks conniving and dishonest. And then if it's 1 in 100 cases where we need evidence, we have nothing, it has to be done. I'll advise clients of their right to do it, but I usually won't make the decision for them.
And that only exists over the phone. So the main problem that I see people have is they've recorded an in-person conversation, which exposes them to a
Right.
criminal, which
Yeah, no, the biggest
fair, but
biggest employment settlement I ever had was a case where the person had made an in-person recording, which did help our case, but it just created a whole bunch of problems. We had to go hire a criminal defense attorney to consult with the federal DOJ, and it was just a nightmare. So yeah, we obviously advise people to be very careful if you're ever going to consider doing anything like that because there's a lot of rules
you,
that apply.
the thing that you can do is you can agree with the other person that you're going to record the next conversation. Sometimes you can do that with HR or something like that. Like, I just want to listen back to this later. Is it okay if I record this? You just need to have it out in the open that it's being recorded. Secret recordings end up being the
Yeah.
problem. But I mean, I tend to think it goes both ways. And the biggest, I think, hurdle, or one of the biggest hurdles I see happen in these cases, is that people are reporting everything that makes them upset in the workplace instead of specifically targeting things that they believe are illegal. And so if you have a coworker who's rude to you and that coworker has committed a crime, and you report to HR, this person's rude to me and they committed a crime, it creates the impression that you just have a personality problem, like a personality difference with the person, which ends up being a defense. So this is, I think, why you want to talk to a lawyer soon if you think you have a problem, so that the lawyer can filter out what you do need to report and what might ultimately create confusion.
No, we see that a lot, and I think people think their report needs to be a lot more detailed or longer really than it does. I tell them it could be 2 sentences. You
That's
want
what
to
I say.
describe
Go
what
for
you
two
observed
sentences.
and why that you think it's illegal and why you think it's illegal, and ask for them to address it and follow up. And that's really all you need.
I think two sentences is always the goal. I have a advocacy component in the cultural health training. And so in the advocacy component, I'm like, write out what you want to advocate for. And people give me these like 10-page long documents. And I'm like, now make it 2 sentences, please.
Yeah, exactly. I think even some lawyers, you see them just
Totally.
wasting time with these long ass documents, and it's like you don't need
What
this.
is this about? Yeah,
Get to the facts, get to the conclusion, and move on.
totally. Totally. So how can people reach you if they need help?
So we offer free legal advice to anyone experiencing an employment issue. And so they can just go to underdoglawyer.com.
And your
And
website is fantastic. Everybody needs to look at it anyway. I was sending it to my whole team. I was like, how much do you love this website? And they were like,
well,
it's
thank you.
so good.
I made it myself, and I got tired of not being able to make the changes because my
Yeah.
IT person, there was a delay. And so I just did it myself. But thanks. But yeah, we monitor that 24/7. And there's always somebody available to respond in emergencies and on weekends and evenings. And so I would say me or an employment lawyer. We do employment, but it's not what we do every day. And
Yeah.
so probably more than half the time, I end up referring someone to either you or someone who dedicates their entire practice
Yeah.
to employment issues.
Yeah. But it's good to know that you're around. And the thing that I love about your caseload and your practice is that if you think something's wrong, you're just like, no, we're not letting this happen no matter what. Like,
Yeah, it makes for interesting case results.
yeah. I love it. So they go to underdoglawyer.com.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And if anybody, I have steps for reporting and an actual template of a reporting email in my book at careerdefense101.com, which is just free for anybody. So it's careerdefense, the number 101.com. And if you look, I think it's like the back appendix, it's just a sample reporting email for anybody who wants a template to make sure you're being clear, like what we're talking about and when you're reporting. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. I will talk to you soon.